Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I apologize if it sounds like I'm recording from inside a vehicle. I'm currently being smuggled across the Ukrainian border so I can avoid military conscription. This week, I want to talk to you guys about how you can better navigate a lot of the conflicting voices that you're going to hear on social media. And this will be especially important for those of you who are in your first 1 to 3 years of training and you've overcome the most important battle, which is being consistent, and you've now trained hard for at least 6 months to a year, and you're starting to shift your perspective more into the long term. You realize that this is something that's going to take years and that you have to strategize a little bit more wisely if you want to make real progress. And so, like any critical thinking person wanting to expand their understanding and knowledge on a certain topic, you go to the highest institution of learning available to you in the West, and that is Instagram. And you begin to scroll, looking for what is best for me, how can I most effectively reach my goals. But you realize very quickly there's a sea of coaching personalities and training methodologies and brands that seem to all disagree with each other on what exactly it is you should be doing to build muscle, get stronger, and get in better shape. And so what I want to do is give you 2 or 3 strategies that you can implement when you're trying to sift your way through all this information so that you can decide what is best for me and how can I implement this information that I'm getting fire hosed with. And the first thing I want you guys to always try and do when you're navigating a training decision is circle back to the same 2 questions. What is my goal or goals? And what are the personal circumstances that I'm working within while I'm on my way to my goals? And to give you an example of what I mean by that, I was talking to a guy last week and he was asking me about squat frequency. He had followed these 2 coaches online on Instagram for a while, and he had gotten good information from both of them, and they both had similar credibility, very strong athletes and successful coaches. But one of them was saying you need to squat once a week for the best progress possible. The other one was saying no, you need 2 to 3 times a week for optimal progress in the squat. And he was saying, well, I don't know what to do. Both these guys have been great based off the information that I've gotten from them. And they also both seem to have the moral authority of being really strong and having coached strong athletes. So which one was right for him? And so I asked him those 2 questions. What is your goal? And obviously, in this case, it was to get his squats stronger. And he also had some other goals that involved running and jiu-jitsu and things like that. And then we talked about what is your personal circumstance that you have to work within. And after a minute or 2, he told me, well, I lift once or twice a week, but I also do jiu-jitsu 2 to 3 times a week, and I'm running twice a week because I have some goals regarding a mile time that I'm working towards. And so I said, okay, well, think of it this way. If you were not pursuing jiu-jitsu and running and you were just lifting, you could probably afford to squat 2 or 3 times a week, because we know intuitively the more you do something, for the most part, the better you're going to be at it. And so if you were just focused on, say, squat, bench, and deadlift, you could go ahead and do 2 or 3 times a week of squatting, and that would probably be great. But since you have a pretty full training schedule already that includes a good amount of running mileage, which is going to tax the legs, and 2 or 3 fairly rigorous jiu-jitsu sessions each week, which is going to be not just tiring on the legs, but on your entire body, trying to add another 1 to 2 squat sessions on top of that might be a little bit too much for you to handle right now. That's not to say that you can't do it. It's just to say that you're already asking your body to do a lot, and so trying to add 1 or 2 more squat sessions on top of that might not be the most productive thing right now. And so stick with once a week for now. Try and get as much progress out of that as you can. And then maybe at some point in the future, when you're spread a little less thin, maybe you're not as focused on running then and you're not doing quite as much, or maybe jiu-jitsu takes a bit of a backseat, then you can experiment with increasing your squatting frequency by an additional session or two each week. And I gave him an opposing example, saying that if you weren't doing any of that and you were just focused on lifting, then I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned with you squatting 1 or 2 additional times in a week. But for your personal circumstance right now, because you've got all these other goals going on, squatting once a week is probably good for you to stick with just for right now. And so by asking and discussing those 2 questions, we were able to navigate these 2 different options that he was faced with. Both of them were good options. Squatting once a week isn't wrong, and squatting 3 times a week isn't wrong. What makes it a good approach or not a good approach depends entirely upon your goal and your circumstance. And that brings me to my second point, which is that your training is going to change as time goes on. And what's good for you now is not necessarily going to be exactly what's good for you 2 years from now. There will be principles and strategies that you keep with you for your entire training career, but whenever you're confronted with 2 seemingly at odds training approaches and you're trying to decide which one's right and which one's wrong, you have to remember that neither one of them is necessarily wrong or right 100%. One of them might be better for your circumstance and goal right now, and the other one might be good for a later time. And to give you an example of this is training to failure. I talked with a guy who he was probably 17 and he had been lifting for about a year and had seen some good results, but he was really interested in training to failure. And he said he had been trying to train to failure for about 6 weeks. And every time he did this, he would be in pain. His elbow would hurt, his knee would hurt, his back would hurt, and he didn't really know what to do because he thought training to failure would be the best way to get him good progress, and his intuition wasn't wrong. The harder you train, the better results you see for the most part. But I talked to him about this repetitive pain issue that kept coming up, and I said training to failure isn't necessarily the worst thing, but if you continue to have pain doing the same thing over and over again, maybe for right now that isn't the best strategy for you. Maybe you take 3 to 6 months, get in some more reps with some lighter weights, and don't go so close to failure, and do that until you're able to train consistently, relatively pain-free. And then maybe at a later time, once you've built up your work capacity, you can then experiment more with training to failure, because right now you don't have a great base of fitness, and so every time you push it to failure or close to it, you start to fall apart. So at this point, just maybe, in your training career, now is the time to accumulate the volume, to get in a lot of reps, a lot of sets, and not worry so much about high intensity, low volume, pushing it to failure. That's not to say that that's wrong, but for right now, your body just isn't ready for it. So let's maybe pause that for 3 to 6 months and then come back to it when your fitness is higher. That brings me to my third point, which is that you have to remember when you're looking at things on social media, you're looking at them in this weird alternate universe where people aren't interacting how they normally would. They're not obeying and abiding a lot of the social courtesies that they normally would, because you can just post something online and walk away. It's almost like hit and run social interaction. And there's obviously a lot of money involved. People are vying for attention. And so a lot of people, including myself, I'm guilty of this as well, are going to present things in a black and white way, because they want you to use their option, they want you to buy their product, and they have to get out there and make a declarative statement, because when people go out on social media and say, well, I think this might be a good option, but maybe not. And if you want to try it, go ahead. But if not, that's okay too. Nobody cares about that in an Instagram feed. People want to come out, they want to be antagonistic, they want to start an argument, they want to make a meme, and that is what gets people's attention. And so a lot of times the information that coaches are bringing to you is not necessarily as nuanced as it would be if they were talking to you in person. You have to do it this way, and everybody else who does it a different way is stupid. And they're telling you that way because they're trying to stand out in this weird alternate universe of Instagram. And so more often than not, the person speaking to you that you're getting information from is trying to do so within this very weird attention-seeking game. And so if you can go back and think of the questions that we talked about before, what is my goal? What are my circumstances? And is this the best thing for me at this point in my training? That's going to help you stay above a lot of the nonsense and arguing that you're going to see online. And it's going to help you do that by not feeling the need to emotionally attach yourself to one specific training style or a coaching personality or a brand. And a lot of times, that's when people run into trouble. They get into a camp and they say, well, this is me and this is my style and I identify with this. If we can stay above that and ask ourselves, what are good principles, what are good ideas, and what works for me in my circumstance right now, that's going to help you out tremendously. Please like, subscribe, follow, donate to the Anti-Defamation League, and I'll see you next time.